Welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we're going to take a look at the Best Picture nominees, and I'm going to give you my ranking of my least favorite to favorite in this category. And this is the reason I wanted to do this is because I had just seen The Zone of Interest a couple days ago, and that was the 10th final Best Picture nominee that I hadn't seen yet. So I've now seen all 10 out of 10, and I've seen all 10 exactly one time. I don't think I would have to do a double check, but I don't think I've seen any of these for a second time yet. So I'm one watch through each of these 10 nominees. We're also exactly about, when I'm recording this, a month away from the Academy Awards on March 10th. And so I want to kind of see at this point how my rankings of all 10 of these, because my goal is to rewatch all 10 of these again, kind of the last couple weeks right before the ceremony. And so we'll see then how much some of these change, because I've talked about in my previous rankings videos, my top 10 favorites of the year. I'm very fluid when it comes to my rankings. A film can hit me a certain way one day and then completely different the next day, and so I'm very fluid with my lists and with my rankings. I'm constantly moving them, so I kind of want to do this. As of right now, this is after one watch each. We'll see how I feel after getting these a second watch, and we'll see that there's a potential that maybe a couple days before the Oscars I might put out another video of another updated top 10 ranking. So for this video, I'm also going to use this as a little bit of a kind of a, I think in the title I'm going to call it like a crash course in terms of the Best Picture nominees for this year. Because again, we have a month until the Oscars, so if you're not super familiar with some of these films, or if you're not someone that watches every single movie that comes out, some of these you maybe haven't seen, some of these you maybe haven't even heard of. And so I kind of want to do a little bit of a crash course to, while you have an extra month here still to go before the Oscars, you can try and find some of these if you're interested in seeing them. So in this video, I'm going to mention the film, and then I'll mention some of the kind of some information about it, the stars, the director, the synopsis. And then I'll also, at the end, I'll mention where you can currently watch the film, and then I'll give, my recommendation of whether I think you should see this film or not. So without further ado, let's get into the list. In 10th place is Maestro. Directed by Bradley Cooper. Screenplay by Bradley Cooper and Josh Singer. A towering and fearless love story chronicling the lifelong relationship between Leonard Bernstein and Felicia Montealegre Cohn Bernstein. A love letter to life and art, Maestro at its core is an emotionally epic portrayal of family and love. Starring Carey Mulligan, Bradley Cooper, and Matt Bomer, Maestro is rated R for some language and drug use. Now, unfortunately, a film has to be in 10th place, and this year it is Maestro. If you look at a lot of other kind of YouTubers and they're doing their Best Picture rankings, a lot of people are putting Maestro at 10, which is unfortunate, but I understand. And it's one of those that usually most years at the Oscars, there's always one, maybe two films every year that kind of sneak into Best Picture that a lot of people really don't think should be there. They're not necessarily the best films. It's kind of, it gets in there for other reasons that it just doesn't feel like it should be in there. Maestro isn't necessarily that film. I really enjoyed Maestro. It's a good film. It's a good movie. But it's just it has the unfortunate where it doesn't quite emotionally hit the level that some of the other films do, and so it's unfortunate that Maestro kind of finds itself falling into 10th place, but it's just again, it's Best Picture. These are the best of the best, and for me, particularly this year, there's 9 films that I really love. Maestro's kind of the one that I just like, so Maestro finds itself in 10th place. Maestro is currently streaming on Netflix, and I would recommend Maestro to anyone who likes kind of intimate, personal stories about real life people, and especially anyone that is familiar with Leonard Bernstein, his life, and his work. That's who I would recommend Maestro to. Coming in at number 9 for me is American Fiction, written and directed by Cord Jefferson. Thelonious Monk Ellison's writing career has stalled because his work isn't deemed black enough. Monk, a writer and English professor, writes a satirical novel under a pseudonym, aiming to expose the publishing world's hypocrisies. The book's immediate success forces him to get deeper enmeshed in his assumed identity and challenges his closely held worldviews. Starring Jeffrey Wright, Sterling K. Brown, and Leslie Uggams. American Fiction is rated R for language throughout, some drug use, sexual references, and brief violence. So I was finally able to see American Fiction a couple weeks ago. It finally got a wide enough release. to where I was able to go to the theater and see it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And this is where, for me, ranking these Best Picture nominees is going to be so tough because this year more so than ever, a lot of the Best Picture nominees are some of my favorite films of the year. American Fiction right now it comes in a 9 in terms of Best Picture ranking, but I think in just overall 2023 movie rankings, I think I have American Fiction in like my top 15-ish of the year. So 9 of the top 15 of my favorite films of the year are Best Picture nominees. So this is so tough. So don't look at this and see American Fiction being in ninth and think that like, oh, that means it's not good if he has it at the bottom of his list. A lot of these films are so good, and I think that's what's going to make this list interesting is how interchangeable this whole list is going to be, just because of how close I view all of these. And so American Fiction, I think the reason maybe it's a little bit lower than some of the others is because it tries to do a lot. It's trying to balance multiple things. It's trying to be this comedy, and at times it's one of the funniest movies like I've seen in a long time. It's at times it is very hilarious. It's hysterical at times, but then there's other points where it's being a little bit more serious. It's making these observations, these pointing out kind of like in the synopsis it mentions like hypocrisies, and then it kind of tackles some bigger issues, and some of that also works really well. Sometimes I think it's the marriage between the two that doesn't always work. So there's excellent parts on both sides. Sterling K. Brown's character, he is pretty funny, but he also has a lot of the bigger emotional moments in the film as well. And so again, a lot of it works. I don't know if it meshes as well together. And then the ending is going to be another thing that a lot of people are going to talk about with this film. For me personally, I liked it. I liked the ending. I liked kind of how the swing it took, kind of how open ended it kind of left a little bit of the story. But all in all, it is a great film, and I understand why it's getting the Best Picture nomination. But for me, as of right now, it's on the lower end of my rankings. American Fiction is currently available to rent on demand. I believe just a couple days ago. I think it hit VOD. So if it's not playing, if it never opened wide enough in a theater near you, or if it's already left the theater, which is very possible, you can rent this at home as well. And I would recommend American Fiction to anyone who likes well done satire. If you like to be, equally parts amused and find humor in things, as well as emotional and impacted by a personal story, that's who I would recommend American Fiction to. Coming in at number 8 is Anatomy of a Fall. Directed by Justine Triet, screenplay by Justine Triet and Arthur Harari. A woman is suspected of her husband's murder, and their blind son faces a moral dilemma as the sole witness. Starring Sandra Hüller, Milo Machado Graner, and Swan Arlad. Anatomy of a Fall is rated R for some language, sexual references, and violent images. Anatomy of a Fall was probably the one of all the Best Picture nominees. I think it's probably the one that caught me the most off guard when I saw it. Again, I mentioned that every year there's a couple films in the Best Picture category that I don't necessarily think are as good, and so sometimes I falsely try and like pick them out before before I even see the films. And this year, Anatomy of a Fall was one of those films where I was like, it's probably going to be good, technically good, but I'm just not going to love it as much. And I was completely caught off guard. This is a very at times kind of dark and kind of chilling film, but it's got nice moments as well. A powerhouse performance by Sandra Hüller, and Anatomy of a Fall. Honestly, it was one of those that it's because it's a courtroom drama, is kind of the main thing that you would call this film. Obviously, just I guess a drama, but more specifically a courtroom drama. And there are extended sequences where you're just in that courtroom for long periods of time, and I remember when I first was watching it, I remember thinking like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna like this. Like, there's not enough editing. We're not kind of bouncing, between the courtroom. Like, if you think of like the trial of the Chicago Seven, there's a lot of courtroom scenes, but then you're constantly kind of bouncing back to the narrative, and you're doing stuff like that. And so that was a film that I didn't know if I was gonna love the courtroom drama stuff. But Anatomy of a Fall, I don't know if it's possible that you've seen the clip going around on Twitter, but there's one really impactful clip from this film, and part of it is kind of told in a little bit of a flashback, but for the most part, this scene is happening in the courtroom, and so that is the most impactful moment of the film, and it's the moment that stands out the most to me. So I ended up enjoying my time, spending a lot of time in this courtroom drama as well. And this is another one of those films where I talk about it a lot on my channel. I love when movies nail the ending. Anatomy of a Fall has an excellent ending for this story, and it's an ending that once you see this film, it's an ending that you want to talk about. You want to, whoever you saw the film with, you want to discuss that ending. And so I've thoroughly enjoyed Anatomy of a Fall, and it feels wrong that it's at eighth on my list. Anatomy of a Fall is currently available to rent on demand, and I would recommend Anatomy of a Fall to anyone who likes courtroom dramas, or if you just like films that leave you thinking and leave you theorizing about, what the ending might have meant, what, the director, what kind of narrative they're telling you, what story they're telling you, and just any type of film that makes you think. Coming in at number 7 is The Zone of Interest, written and directed by Jonathan Glazer. The commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Haas, and his wife Hedwig strive to build a dream life for their family in a house and garden next to the camp. Starring Christian Friedel, Sandra Hüller, and Medusa Knopf. The Zone of Interest is rated PG-13 for thematic material, some suggestive material, and smoking. And so I just mentioned The Zone of Interest was number 10. This was the final Best Picture nominee that I still needed to see. Finally got a wide enough release where I was able to go see it. And The Zone of Interest was another one of those where, when just kind of picking the films before, before I'd seen them, I was picking The Zone of Interest to being one that I didn't necessarily know if I was going to like it. I think I was going to, technically, it's a story about the Holocaust. I was going to see that it was going to be a good film, but it wasn't necessarily going to, reach levels of, I enjoyed that. And when you listen to a lot of kind of movie critics or just people talking about The Zone of Interest, that is kind of the sentiment that comes around with the film a lot, is that people like the film. I don't think anyone's really saying that they enjoy the film. It's a harrowing watch. It is emotionally upsetting, at times, and it's one of those films where the content itself, it's more to upset you and make you just kind of more uncomfortable and on edge it's not a warm hug of a movie by any stretch. But I think what was so interesting to me, the reason I liked The Zone of Interest as much as I ended up liking it was because as I was watching it, I was like, okay, I understand why people like this. I understand the idea of what's going on here. But it wasn't until my car ride home. Usually, I leave a movie and I either put on some music, or sometimes I just immediately look up reviews and listen to what other people, their thoughts of a film, on my drive home. But this one was one where I got in my car and I started driving home, and I just drove in silence because I was just thinking about the film. I was just thinking about some of the scenes, what some of it meant, what Jonathan Glazer was trying to say with some of the scenes. And it ultimately just kind of, for me, it was one of those films that the more I pondered it, the more I thought about it, the more it just stuck with me as it's The Zone of Interest. It's really just kind of this I'm trying a day in a life is kind of the subgenre where you just kind of follow a family, but it really is a day in a life of a family of monsters. And so it's just the the way they were able to tell this story, the narrative in which they told this story, really just captivated me. It has some of the most haunting sound design of any film. The score was disturbing and beautiful, at the same time. And so there was just so much about The Zone of Interest that worked really well for me. And that car ride home of just kind of thinking about my experience with this film is what really kind of cemented it to me as one of my, again, it's hard to say one of my favorite movie experiences of the year, but something that just stood out to me and earned its spot higher, a little bit higher up on this list. The Zone of Interest is currently only in theaters, so hopefully if you're interested in seeing it, you can find a theater around you that is still playing it. And the Zone of Interest is actually the reason why I kind of wanted to put a recommended category of when we're talking about these films, because it's hard to recommend The Zone of Interest to everyone, because it's kind of, it's haunting. It's a tough watch at times. A lot of times, if you're fully immersed into the film, it's really upsetting at times. But I would recommend The Zone of Interest for anyone who is in a good headspace, is in the headspace for a Holocaust film that is told in kind of a unique, different perspective, as you're watching a family of Nazis that live just right outside of Auschwitz, as opposed to, because that's one thing in the film is you never really go over that wall into Auschwitz. You're always just kind of with this family that just happens to share a wall with the concentration camp. Coming in at number 6 for me is Poor Things, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, screenplay by Tony McNamara. Brought back to life by an unorthodox scientist, a young woman runs off with a lawyer on a whirlwind adventure across the continents. Free from the prejudices of her time, she grows steadfast in her purpose to stand for equality and liberation. Starring Emma Stone, Mark Ruffalo, and Willem Dafoe. Poor Things is rated R for strong and pervasive sexual content, graphic nudity, disturbing material, gore, and language. So I mentioned that the last spot, the zone of interest, was the reason that I put in the recommended, if I recommend this video for you segment. Poor Things is the reason that I'm putting in the rating. Because if I'm doing quick math, I think 7 of the Best Picture nominees this year are rated R. This is like the most R-rated of those. Poor Things, it has a lot of kind of, I don't want to say it's for shock value. It's not shock value like scenes, but it's very, again, kind of some graphics, some a lot of nudity, but it's important scenes that go in there to document Bella Baxter's her journey as she is, kind of just going across the globe, bouncing around from continent to continent, with Mark Ruffalo's character. She goes through a lot of different events in her life, and so it truly is just kind of like a coming of age story in that sense, where you're following Bella Baxter, who has kind of this more naive, innocent outlook on life, and you follow her journey as she kind of just learns more about the world around her and the person that she is and who she wants to become. And it's interesting that you're getting this kind of story from someone who's like in her 20s and 30s, kind of a little bit older of a person in terms of a coming of age story. You think coming of age, you think of high school, right? But you get this journey with Emma Stone's character, Bella Baxter. You get this journey with her that it does go a couple places that are kind of, it's not necessarily the film that you probably are going to want to watch with your family, if you're interested in seeing it. But the journey that she goes on is, oftentimes it's pretty, it's funny. Poor Things was kind of up in a couple, in kind of like comedy categories at some of the, like the Golden Globes. And so I kind of went in, was like, knowing that it was going to be, comedic. But then also, if you're familiar with Yorgos Lanthimos' work, you know that there's going to be deeper meaning, and there's going to be more dramatic and intimate scenes in that sense, that I think it works really well. And so ultimately, from start to finish, I think you just get this grand coming of age story with Bella Baxter, this grand journey that she goes on. And so I thoroughly ended up enjoying this film a lot more than I think going in I thought I was going to like it. I ended up loving this film. Currently, Poor Things is just streaming in theaters. It's been out for a couple months now, so it's very likely that before the Oscars, it's gonna get like a VOD, being able to rent it on demand. But as of right now, it is just in theaters. So if you're looking to go see Poor Things, try and find a theater around you that it is playing at. And I would recommend Poor Things to anyone who likes coming of age stories, who likes. Following a character as they kind of discover life and discover the meaning of who they are and their purpose, but is also comfortable with some uncomfortable scenes and some kind of graphic nudity, some risque themes. Coming in at number 5 is Killers of the Flower Moon, directed by Martin Scorsese, screenplay by Eric Roth and Martin Scorsese. When oil is discovered in 1920s Oklahoma under Osage Nation land, the Osage people are murdered one by one until the FBI steps in to unravel the mystery. Starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Lily Gladstone, and Robert De Niro, Killers of the Flower Moon is rated R for violence, some grisly images, and language. Anytime that Martin Scorsese has a film that's coming out, obviously it's going to be one of the most anticipated films of the year for a lot of people, for obvious reasons. He is a legend in Hollywood, and he delivers again with Killers of the Flower Moon. When this film came out, I kind of had this realization that I hadn't seen as much Martin Scorsese films as I thought I'd had, and so I kind of went on a journey going back and rewatching some of the classics of his that I hadn't seen, like The Departed and Taxi Driver. And so I think ultimately Killers of the Flower Moon, I think, is maybe the I should have looked this up before. Maybe the 7th or 8th Scorsese film that I've seen now, and kind of a hot take for me is this is one of my favorite. I think it's also it kind of goes in because it's also the first Martin Scorsese film that I've seen in theaters. Obviously, The Irishman was just on Netflix, and then I it kind of I had missed The Wolf of Wall Street, missed that in theaters. So there's this was kind of the first time going to the theater and watching a Scorsese picture, and I just it's one of those things that there's a lot of kind of discussion about people not really liking kind of the direction it goes. Maybe they think it should have been focused a little bit more on Lily Gladstone and the Osage um, people and they're making it a little bit more personal, like their story. And so I do understand kind of some of that, the criticism, as opposed to kind of following Leo and Robert De Niro's characters a little bit more. But ultimately, for me, when I went in, I thoroughly just enjoyed the film that I got. And a lot is going to be said about the runtime of pushing 3.5 hours. Again, for me, it's one of those that I felt the length when I was watching it, but I was thoroughly enjoying the journey, and I was enjoying every second the that Scorsese was giving us in this film. There wasn't any parts for me that I felt necessarily dragged or was like unnecessary. It all felt necessary to me, and it just completed this epic kind of tale, this story that Scorsese sets out to tell. And I thoroughly enjoyed my experience of watching Killers of the Flower Moon. The film is currently streaming on Apple TV Plus, or might be available to rent if you don't have Apple TV Plus. And I would recommend Killers of the Flower Moon for anyone who likes crime films that touch a little bit more on kind of tragedy. Kind of it's not your straight up gangster film where people are getting murdered and it's not really that impactful. Obviously, this is a true story. It's tragic what happened, and so it's a little bit more. It's a tougher, at times, because of that tragic element of the real story. It makes it a little bit tougher of a watch. But if you're okay with that and you like crime films, I recommend this film for you. Coming in at number 4 is The Holdovers. Directed by Alexander Payne, screenplay by David Hemmingson. A curmudgeonly instructor at a New England prep school is forced to remain on campus during Christmas break to babysit the handful of students with nowhere to go. Eventually, he forms an unlikely bond with one of them, a damaged, brainy troublemaker, and with the school's head cook, who just lost a son in Vietnam. Starring Paul Giamatti, Da'Vine Joy Randolph, and Dominic Sessa. The Holdovers is rated R for language, some drug use, and brief sexual material. And I'm now realizing that as I'm about to say this, that I clearly have a problem with trying to judge movies before I see them. But The Holdovers is another one of these that it was pretty obvious for a while before the film's release that it was going to be an Oscar player. It was going to be in the Best Picture category. And at that point, I remember looking at it and just being like, that's probably going to be one of those films that maybe I appreciate it, but it doesn't impact me, or I'm not like as big of a fan as I thought I would be. And so then, before the film came out, I went back and I watched Sideways, another Alexander Payne and Paul Giamatti pairing, a film that I hadn't, not only had I not seen it, I hadn't even really ever heard about it. I wasn't, when that came out, obviously I wasn't really big into film, and so it was one of those films that just kind of slid under my radar. So I went back and watched Sideways, and I just kind of fell in love with Paul Giamatti as an actor from that film, and obviously Alexander Payne's the way that he was able to to use Paul Giamatti in that sense, the way that their collaborations together, it was just I loved Sideways way more than I thought I would. And so I instantly seeing that the day before, I went into The Holdovers the next day super excited and ended up loving it. It was one of those films that coming out in, I think, came out in November, kind of set around Christmas time, obviously. It was just in the season, one of the first holiday movies of the year, if you will. And part of it is like the film, it's kind of earned that title of, a lot of people are calling this an instant Hollywood classic. Like, it's a film that they're going to go back and rewatch every holiday season. And and I think that part of that is because when you describe it that way, you are talking about this as potentially a warm hug of a movie, one of those films that makes you feel good. And sure, there definitely are parts of that is part of the story, but there's a whole like other kind of side of this story that's going on as well, that's a little bit sadder, a little bit more emotional, a little bit kind of a little colder. That's not necessarily the warm hug part of this film, and that drama, that dramatic, those moments work very well for me as well. And so it's another one of those, we talk about sometimes you get these films that have two different things going on. The Holdovers, I think, meshes a lot of its kind of contradicting themes and emotions really well. And so ultimately, the Holdovers for me just kind of felt like this big complete picture, and it has multiple moments to me that just stuck with me and hit me really hard in the theater. And so the Holdovers, it just swept me off my feet. It moved me emotionally. It impacted me in such a way that I left the theater just in love with this film. I love the Holdovers. The Holdovers, it's currently streaming on Peacock. Again, I'm assuming this is another one that you can rent on demand if you don't have Peacock. And I would recommend The Holdovers to anyone that likes good dramas, very emotional, beautiful films that or if you like films that kind of that feature the unconventional pairings, kind of the, I don't want to necessarily say buddy cop, but your two characters that you don't, they're not going to get along, and then it's kind of this journey of them kind of learning to love each other and just kind of the unexpected friendships. Coming in at number 3 is Oppenheimer. Written and directed by Christopher Nolan, the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer's role in the development of the atomic bomb during World War II. Starring Cillian Murphy, Robert Downey Jr., and Emily Blunt, Oppenheimer is rated R for some sexuality, nudity, and language. Now, Oppenheimer is one of the films on this list that makes me most excited to get a second rewatch in and see how my list changes. Because I've been watching a lot of the YouTubers that I like, the Film Drunk, Austin Burke, others, that have come out and they've kind of been making their top 10 Best Picture ranked videos. And a lot of people, it's just Oppenheimer's number one because for them it was the clear runaway, Best Picture of the year. And I thoroughly enjoyed Oppenheimer when I was in the theater. I enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed the film, the cinematic masterpiece that it is. I understood all of that, but for me personally, I don't know if it reached the levels of like hitting on an emotional level to where I loved this film. I really appreciate it, and I like a lot of what it's doing, but it didn't quite hit the level of like I love this film. And I think that's kind of the last little bit that's separating from me from being able to put this at like my number one is I appreciate so much about what it does. I understand the technical craft. I understand that, Oppenheimer's gonna win 5, 6, 7 Oscars, come March 10th because of so much of like the technical crafts of what's going on in the film. I understand all of that, but I'm excited on a second watch to see if I can get that last little bit of like love this film, and if I do get that on that second watch, then it's very possible that Oppenheimer jumps up all the way to number one on my list. Again, a lot of these we're in this category of these Oppenheimer, the Holdovers, and the next two that are coming up on this list. Honestly, even Killers of the Flower Moon, a lot of those films are in my top like 6, 7 of the year, and so it's very possible that Oppenheimer can make that jump if on a second rewatch I find that I love it a little bit more. So Oppenheimer is currently available to rent on demand. I do also believe that it actually just got put back into theaters. So if you happen to miss it back last summer when it was in theaters, I recommend going and checking it out. Seeing this film in the theater is the best way to thoroughly immerse yourself in the film and in the experience. So that's how I would recommend seeing it if you're going to go see it. And I would recommend Oppenheimer to anyone that likes, biopics, if you like true stories of someone from history and then their impact on it. And I just recommend Oppenheimer if you're a big fan of Christopher Nolan. He's obviously kind of tackled so many different films over the years, but I think it's kind of this consensus now that this is Christopher Nolan's masterpiece. This is the which is insane to say for someone who directed, Inception and Interstellar, the Dark Knight Rises, so many films that are just kind of considered by a lot of people as these like classic films, and even like Memento, Prestige. You get these other films that maybe weren't as grand scale, but people just love Christopher Nolan's work. So it's crazy to say that this is his masterpiece. But if you're a fan of Christopher Nolan, you've probably already seen Oppenheimer, obviously. But if you are a fan and you just haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend checking it out. Coming in at number 2 is Barbie, directed by Greta Gerwig, screenplay by Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach. Barbie and Ken are having the time of their lives in the colorful and seemingly perfect world of Barbieland. However, when they get a chance to go to the real world, they soon discover the joys and perils of living among humans. Starring Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, and America Ferrera. Barbie is rated PG-13 for suggestive references and brief language. And so I talk about Oppenheimer being the film that I think has a great chance of kind of jumping up in my rankings. I do think Barbie is potentially the film that maybe has a chance of kind of sliding a little bit. I do think that there is a lot to be said for Barbie is kind of this film of the moment when it came out during the summertime of the Barbenheimer summer, obviously. And so I do think that there is a very strong chance that maybe Barbie is elevated for me just because of that moment in time, that Barbenheimer weekend, and how that affected us. Like, and maybe that has affected kind of my love for the film a little bit more than I would be normally would be willing to admit. But that's obviously, even if Barbie slides a little bit, it's not falling out of my top 10. It's not falling too far in my rankings. It's still an excellent film, a film that I was emotionally connected to a lot more than I thought I would be going into it. Obviously I knew have faith in Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach as well for the stories that they can tell and the way that they can make these stories a little bit more emotional and connect to you that way. So I had faith that we were going to get a good movie here, but it to me it reached a level that I wasn't ready for. It was just next level, this existential journey that Barbie and Ken are going on in this film. It just reached a level for me that was higher than my wildest imaginations of what I thought that a movie with the Barbie property could become. So I thoroughly enjoyed Barbie. I do think that there's a chance that maybe it's kind of a victim a little bit in the sense of the way that like Spider-Man No Way Home was, where it was kind of just a film of the moment type thing, where in theaters we all loved it, and then kind of giving it second and third watches, maybe some of us, obviously I still love No Way Home, but it's possible that a lot of people kind of they were dropping it a little bit because it was just this event, and I think Barbie kind of was that event as well. But there's a potential that for me maybe it comes down a little bit. So I'm excited to see, in a couple weeks when I get a chance to rewatch this film again for a second time and see kind of if that where that changes, if it does kind of fall down, or if honestly maybe if it even rises. There's a chance that maybe I just love this even more. So I'm excited to give Barbie another rewatch. Barbie is currently streaming on Max, and I would recommend Barbie to anyone who likes good comedies and likes films with kind of more feminist themes. And honestly, anyone that's just a fan of Greta Gerwig. Again, that's kind of the same thing I mentioned with Nolan and Scorsese. Chances are, if you're a fan of those directors, you're gonna see every movie, so you've probably already seen Barbie. But yeah, just by some chance, if you happen to miss Barbie, see it. It's one of the best films of the year, and it's also one of the most cultural, kind of the biggest moments of the year as well. And so for that reason itself, it's also worth going and checking out. And then coming in at number one for me is Past Lives, written and directed by Celine Song. Nora and Haesung, two childhood friends, are reunited in New York for one fateful week as they confront notions of destiny, love, and the choices that make a life. Starring Greta Lee, Teo Yu, and John Majaro. Past Lives is rated PG-13 for some strong language. And so obviously Past Lives was going to end up on number one of my Best Picture nominees ranked list because it was my favorite film of 2023. Past Lives, it's kind of this smaller A24 directorial debut for Celine Song. It's kind of this smaller film that is just so emotional, and it hit me like a ton of bricks when I was watching this in theaters, just how emotionally moved and impacted I was by this film. And so it was just kind of a no-brainer that as soon as I saw it, every now and then there's films like last year with Everything Everywhere All at Once. As soon as I saw it, I knew like this is going to be my favorite film of the year. It's going to be so hard for anything to top this. That's how I was with Past Lives as well when I saw it last summer. As soon as I finished the film, I instantly knew that for me this was it was such an intimate and loving portrait of just life, of following these characters, following their lives, the way that they evaluate, where they are in their lives and the journeys that they've all been on, and kind of just where they are. It just the way that it all comes together so well. Just I absolutely loved it, and it's incredible for me to realize that this is Celine Song. Her directorial debut, her first, kind of her big film, and just to hit like this, it truly is just one of those films that I'm going to just to follow Celine Song's career, follow the journey she goes on as a filmmaker, because the way that this impacted me so much, I know that she's got something when it comes to storytelling, especially kind of these smaller dramas. The way that she's able to give you these characters, I'm truly in awe with her as a filmmaker, and everything just worked so well about Past Lives for me. So ultimately, that becomes my number one. And I talk about, in a couple months I'm going to rearrange some of these, probably depending on how they hit different on a different rewatch. I don't think Past Lives is changing. I think it's going to stay my number one just because of how much love I had for it when I saw it in theaters. Past Lives, it's currently streaming on Showtime, and I would recommend this film to anyone who likes, intimate romantic dramas, who likes a movie that's gonna make you kind of vulnerable, make you open up a little bit, and get in touch with your emotions. And that's it. Those are the 2024 Best Picture nominees, ranked as of today. I'm recording this about February 9th. We'll see in the next month or so how this list changes. What films are going to be rising, what films are going to be dropping. Ultimately, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to do another top 10 video like this, but I think I will do, as I continue on my category breakdown video series, I will eventually get to Best Picture. So that's probably where we'll give the update on what's moved and what's changed. But so that's it for Best Picture nominees ranked. And so thank you for watching and have a great day.